Hello everyone, and we're approaching that very magical time of the year which is known as Samhain or Halloween, and I was going to go for a lovely walk today, but I'm preparing a kind of, what would you call it, a talk on Samhain for a little market that I'm going to tomorrow, and I'm also going to be selling some of my herbal bits and pieces and my 2 books, the Weed handbooks. So I'm not going for a walk. I'm going to make a barmbrack instead, which is a traditional Halloween cake that we eat here in Ireland. And barmbrack comes from the Gaelic barm, meaning yeasty and frothy, and brack meaning speckled, because the cake is going to be speckled with lots of raisins and sultanas, and I'm going to put in one of our apples as well to make it lovely and moist. So the beautiful thing about the barmbrack is you can use beer, or you can use tea and make a tea loaf, or you can use whiskey. So what I like to do is use the tea and the whiskey. So before I grate the apple, I have all my fruit and sugar here. So I'll just give that a stir around, get the sugar. I'll put it in the larger bowl. So here's all the fruit with the sugar mixed together. You can use brown sugar if you would like to, but I just grabbed white because that's all I have in the kitchen. And I've got my cup of tea, which has been brewing for the last 2 to 3 hours, so it's quite a strong cup of tea. And I'll just mix all that in. You can see the tea is in there now. Some recipes say to leave it overnight with the tea on. But because I'm adding the whiskey as well, I'm not going to worry about that. The tea is going to add some colour, a little bit of flavour, and obviously a lot of moistness to the cake. So this is a traditional Halloween cake. And why I'm putting the apple in is because Halloween or Samhain is a traditional time to try to do some divination, because the veils between the worlds are thin. There are spirits coming through, and if you have the ability, you can go through the other way. It's an opportunity for people on the other side to connect with us on this side, and it's a great opportunity to do divination because there's a lot of magic in the air, and as I said, the veils are thin, so information is going to come through. So I'm sure a lot of you out there already know a lot of things that people would do with apples would be things like you'd have games of bobbing apples in a barrel of water or a bowl of water these days, or you might have apples dangling on a string and you try to catch them with your mouth and your hands behind your back. But apples can also be used for divination. So a young lady could put an apple under her pillow, and she may dream of her future husband. And alternatively, she could peel the apple in one long piece, throw it over her shoulder, and when it lands, it's supposed to create the initial letter of her husband's first name. So whether that works or not, I've never actually tried it. But there's lots of things, lots of customs and traditions to do with Samhain, which I did a film on last year, so you can have a look at that as well. And one of the things that I didn't mention in that film is that a lot of the games and the fun would be around lovers falling in love, wanting to know who you're going to marry, and that's where this cake comes in, which I'll talk about shortly. So I'm just going to put the grated apple into the fruit. I don't want to put the peel in, just the grated apple. So the apple is mixed in there. Other things that people would do at the Samhain celebrations would be cracking nuts, seeing how many nuts would crack on the fireside. And if your nut cracks, it means you're going to fall in love within the year or be married within the year. I'm just going to throw in a healthy measure of whiskey. You know, whiskey's good for the health. You could use poaching, but I think whiskey's nicer because it actually has more of a taste. So I'll just give that another little stir. So traditionally, when this barmbrack was made, all sorts of little, what would you call them? Little divinatory tools would be popped inside. And these tools could be a thimble, a pea, a broken twig, a coin, a piece of cloth. They would be the most kind of well-known little things that would be put into the cake, but it would have differed from area to area because each locality would have its own customs as well. So I'll tell you what I've got here. I've got my flour, I've got baking powder mixed into it, I've got lots of spices. I've got nutmeg, mixed spice, cinnamon, cloves, all mixed in. I'm also mixing in some butter now, just a very small amount. I don't usually mix the butter in the flour on a plate, but I've lost one of my bowls because the house has been in such disarray lately, and this bowl is too small to do it in. So it doesn't really matter because it's only a small amount of butter. And I'm now going to put this flour in with the fruit and just mix it in a little bit at a time. So as a tradition of Samhain, when the cake is made, all those little bits and pieces that I mentioned that are going into the cake, that's the thimble, the stick, the piece of cloth, the coin, the ring, all these little symbols represent your future for the year. So if you were to get the ring, for example, it would suggest that you will have an offer of marriage and you might be wed within the year. If you get a coin, that would obviously suggest good fortune and wealth coming in the coming year. If you get the piece of cloth, it could represent poverty. If you get the little twig or a broken match, that can represent squabbles and fallings out and breakdown in relationships. The pea or the thimble would represent spinsterhood, or, you know, if you're a man, you're not going to get a girlfriend or a woman. So making a cake like this and slicing it up for your guests or for the family members, it's a bit of fun to see who is going to get which little trinket, and then obviously to observe what happens in the coming year. So that kind of act of putting these little things into a cake, it's diminished over the last few years, and that's because people don't want to break their teeth on coins or rings or choke on a piece of wood or cloth. You know, obviously we don't live as dangerously as our ancestors did. And so now we're just left with the tradition of the cake. I think there's also people that were concerned of any germs or bacteria that might be on something like a coin and what effect the metal would have when it's heated. So nowadays we just have a bit of fun with the cake itself. So that's the last of it. And then it goes into a greased tin and into the oven. So it's very simple to make. It's really delicious and tasty. I mean, you could make a cake like this at any time of the year, but it's one of those lovely foods that goes with the celebration of Samhain, along with colcannon and champ, which are two potato dishes, and they would also traditionally be served at this time. So in the more recent past, the church would have disapproved of meat. So whereas in the ancient past there would have maybe been roast pig, there would have been lamb stews and things like that, because of the church it turned into a meatless feast. So it would be apples and nuts and fruits and berries and cakes like this, and all the games that went along with those things. Right, so this is all mixed in and the recipe will be underneath. This recipe that I've used today, I've kind of mixed together 2 or 3 recipes because I didn't like the quantities in some of them. And then they were, the different recipes were suggesting different temperatures and everything. So I've kind of just made this up, and I'll just be putting it into a medium oven. So before it goes into the tin, I'm just going to throw in an egg. And just fold it in. So I do love tradition. I love to keep traditions going. So, at Christmas time we have our traditions, and throughout various other times of the year, Bealtaine, there's always something lovely to do which brings nature into the house. So in this case, the fruits, the berries, you could add nuts, but that wouldn't really be a traditional Barmbreac. You could use beer instead of the whiskey and tea, and it's a nice opportunity for me. I don't bake very often, but I'm prompted to do it now because it is that time of the year. It is that season of the year. And by the time Samhain comes, which is not for another, 3 or 4 days, the cake will have matured beautifully and we're just ready. Because cakes like this always taste a wee bit better when they've sat for a day or 2 or 3. And, it gives the whiskey and the tea a chance to really infuse the flavours into the cake. So I'm just going to pour the cake into the tin. And there might be some left over to eat off the spoon, which I do love to do. In fact, I always make sure there is a little bit left over to take some off the spoon. Hey. So there it is. This is a Barmbreac. I'm going to put it into the oven, and it'll take about an hour and a half. So when it comes out, we tip it onto a cooling tray and just let it cool. So I have my skewer. I'm going to check if the cake is done. It should be by now because it's been about an hour and a half, which is a lot longer than I expected because the oven went a little bit there. Perfect. Perfect. So I just place this onto the cooling tray and I'll leave it to sit there for a few minutes, and then I'll lift it out of the tin and leave it on the tray until tomorrow morning, and then I'll pop it away until Halloween or Samhain Eve and enjoy it then. So I hope you have a really interesting Samhain. I hope you get to commune with your ancestors. I hope you get a chance to sit and really go inwards and think about all of those who've been before you and have worked and worked and worked to get you to where you are now, and just feel some gratitude for that. So have a lovely holiday, and we'll see you next week. I hope you enjoyed today's film. If you did, subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And have a look at the website danusirishherbgarden.com for more information about us and about the herbal medicine courses I offer and the Wise Woman Way training. And if you go to the shop, you can find the books, the Weed handbooks and other herbal goodies. And remember, we put a new film out every Sunday. So looking forward to seeing you next week.